My aunt hid the will, then regretted it when the notary unsealed the legal backup. The day my grandmother died, silence fell across our family home like a shadow. Not the reverent kind that accompanies grief, but something more calculated, more precise. I stood by the window in her bedroom, watching as my Aunt Margaret, the eldest of Grandma's 4 children, moved through the house with a strange efficiency. She wasn't crying. She was organizing. "Eleanor," she called to me without turning around, her voice steady as she rummaged through Grandma's desk. "Could you please call Pastor Williams about the service? I need to sort through some important documents." Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and stepped out into the hallway. But something made me pause just beyond the doorframe. Through the crack between the hinges, I watched as Margaret pulled open the bottom drawer of Grandma's cherrywood desk. Her hands worked quickly, methodically. She removed a manila envelope, glanced inside, then tucked it into her oversized handbag. That night, the family gathered in Grandma's living room. Decades of memories surrounded us, photographs chronicling birthdays and graduations, shelves lined with porcelain figurines she'd collected over 50 years of marriage. My cousins huddled on the sofa. My uncle stood awkwardly by the fireplace, and Margaret commanded the center of the room. "Mom left everything clear," she announced, her voice carrying the authority she'd wielded even when Grandma was alive. "It's all in the will. We don't need to worry about anything right now." My father, always the peacekeeper, nodded solemnly. "When do you think we should go over it, just so everyone knows what's expected?" Margaret's smile tightened. "We should give it some time, out of respect." Days turned into weeks. Every time someone brought up the will, the distribution of Grandma's possessions, the fate of her home where I'd spent countless summers, Margaret had a ready excuse. "The lawyer is reviewing it. There are some tax considerations we need to address first." Mom wanted us to wait until after the 3-month memorial. But I knew better. I had spent every Thursday afternoon with Grandma for the last 5 years. I'd drive over after my shift at the library, bringing fresh pastries from the bakery she loved, and we'd sit together for hours. She'd tell me stories about her childhood in rural Pennsylvania, about how she met my grandfather at a dance hall in 1958, about the early years of raising her children. "Eleanor," she'd said to me once, her fingers tracing the pattern on her teacup. "People think because I'm old that I don't notice things. But I see everything. I see who calls just to check, if I'm still breathing and who actually listens when I speak." I remembered how she'd taken me to her desk that day, unlocked the bottom drawer with a small brass key she kept on her necklace, and showed me a document. "This is my will," she had said, her voice firm despite her frailty. "I've had it properly notarized. Everything is in order." I hadn't read it. It wasn't my place. But I had witnessed her careful attention to detail. This was a woman who labeled every jar in her pantry, who kept receipts organized by month going back 10 years. The idea that she would leave things informal or unclear was unthinkable. Yet here we were, 6 weeks after her funeral, and the will had mysteriously vanished. Margaret started coming over to Grandma's house when no one else was there. I only knew because Mrs. Chen across the street mentioned seeing her car in the driveway on Tuesday mornings. "She's been taking boxes out," Mrs. Chen told me when I ran into her at the grocery store. "I assumed you all were finally clearing things out. But we weren't. Not collectively anyway. At the next family dinner, a tradition we maintained even after Grandma's passing, I noticed Grandma's pearl earrings dangling from Margaret's ears. The same earrings Grandma had promised to my cousin Sarah for her wedding day. When Sarah's gaze lingered on them too long, Margaret touched one self-consciously. "Mom wanted me to have these," she said to no one in particular. "She told me last year. I watched Sarah's face fall, but she said nothing. No one did. Margaret had always been the strongest personality in our family. The one who knew best, who spoke the loudest, who made decisions for everyone else. Questioning her felt like questioning the natural order of things. The air around our family table grew thicker each week. My Uncle David once started, "I thought Mom mentioned something about the grandfather clock going to the eldest son," Margaret interrupted. "Which would be you, but she changed her mind last summer. She thought it would be better in my foyer, given the space." I watched David deflate, nodding as though this made perfect sense, though I'd heard Grandma specifically mention she wanted that clock to stay with him since he'd been the one to restore it after it was damaged in the move from her previous home. By the third month, Margaret had quietly relocated several pieces of furniture, all the silver, and most of the jewelry to her own house. My father tried to raise the subject once more at Sunday dinner. "Margaret, I think it might be time to formally go through Mom's will, just so everyone has clarity." Margaret set down her fork with a clink. "I've been meaning to talk to you all about that. It seems Mom never got around to finalizing things. I've spoken with a lawyer, and as executor, which I'm assuming would have been her choice. I'll handle the distribution of her assets fairly. You all know I have everyone's best interests at heart." The table fell silent. I looked around at my family, at these people who had known my grandmother for decades, who had been raised by her, loved by her. They all nodded, accepting Margaret's statement without challenge. All except me. "That doesn't sound like Grandma," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "She was always so organized." Margaret's eyes found mine, sharp as flint. "Eleanor, I know you spent time with Mom in her final years, and that's lovely. But you didn't know her like I did. She was becoming more forgetful, less concerned with formalities." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. I was just the granddaughter, the youngest adult in the family, the one who showed up at gatherings, with books instead of a partner or children, easy to overlook, easy to silence. I didn't speak up again that night, but as I drove home, my hands tight on the steering wheel, Grandma's voice echoed in my mind. "Always keep a backup, Eleanor. People forget how easily paper disappears." In the quiet of my apartment, I began to remember more details. The notary, who had come to Grandma's house that spring afternoon. How she had asked me to witness her signature on the will. How the notary, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, had mentioned something about keeping a sealed copy just in case. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office, asking how to find a notary who may have worked with my grandmother. They gave me a list of 3 possibilities based on her address. The second name clicked. Arthur Peterson. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. Would he even remember? Would he still have records from over a year ago? "Peterson Notary Services," a gruff voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Peterson. My name is Eleanor Winters. I think you helped my grandmother, Virginia Winters, with her will last year. I was present when you notarized it." A pause. "The lady on Maple Street, with the collection of bird figurines in her study?" My heart leaped. Yes, that's her. I remember her well. Sharp lady. Very particular about everything being done properly. I swallowed hard. She passed away 3 months ago, and we're having trouble locating her will. I was wondering if you might have any record of it or... "I still have the sealed backup," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Your grandmother insisted on it. Said it wasn't for the family, just in case something got complicated." Complicated. That word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning. Could we arrange to have it opened? I asked, barely above a whisper. As the notary of record, I can unseal it if the original cannot be located. You'll need to bring death certificate documentation and your ID. We'll need to notify all potential heirs named in the will of the reading. I agreed to everything, making an appointment for the following week. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan how to handle what would certainly be explosive information. During that week, I moved through my days in a fog. At work, I shelved books mechanically, my mind racing with possibilities. What if I was wrong? What if Grandma really had changed her mind and told only Margaret? What if I was about to create a rift in my family that could never be healed? But deeper than those doubts was a certainty, my grandmother's voice, clear and strong. I see who actually listens when I speak. She had trusted me to remember, to notice, to act when necessary. Margaret called a family gathering that weekend, to honor Mom's memory and discuss the distribution of some meaningful items. Her voice on the phone was honey-sweet, but I detected an undercurrent of urgency I hadn't heard before. We gathered at Grandma's house, which still stood mostly intact despite Margaret's selective removals. My aunts and uncles, cousins, and their spouses filled the living room. Margaret had prepared a slideshow of family photos and spoke eloquently about Grandma's legacy. "Mom sacrificed so much for all of us," she said, standing before the mantel where Grandma's favorite clock used to tick. Her sacrifice taught me the importance of taking care of this family, of making the hard decisions. As the eldest, I've always tried to honor that responsibility. She barely mentioned me. When she spoke of Grandma's final years, she referred to our weekly check-ins, as though she, not I, had been the one bringing pastries and listening to stories every Thursday. After her speech, Margaret began distributing small items to various family members: a ceramic bird to my cousin Jason, a set of ornamental spoons to my Aunt Beth, a hand-knitted blanket to my Uncle David, instead of the grandfather clock he had restored. "And Eleanor," she said, her voice softening performatively, "I thought you might like to have Grandma's collection of bookmarks. I know how you love to read." Bookmarks. Not the first edition Austen that Grandma and I had read together. Not the reading chair where I'd spent countless hours beside her. Bookmarks. Thin, disposable placeholders. I accepted them with a tight smile, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. I had invited Mr. Peterson to arrive at 4 p.m., and it was nearly time. The doorbell rang. Margaret frowned. She hadn't been expecting anyone else. My father answered the door, and I heard the murmur of male voices in the entryway. When he returned to the living room, Mr. Peterson followed, carrying a leather portfolio. "Who's this?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp. I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected. "This is Mr. Peterson. He's the notary who prepared and witnessed Grandma's will last year." I turned to him. "Thank you for coming." The room fell silent. All eyes moved between Mr. Peterson, Margaret, and me. "There must be some mistake," Margaret said, recovering quickly. "As I've explained to the family, my mother left things informal. I have a sealed copy of Virginia Winter's last will and testament, Mr. Peterson interrupted, his professional tone cutting through her objection. "Executed and notarized on April 15th of last year, with Eleanor Winters serving as one witness and myself as the other. Mrs. Winters specifically requested this backup be maintained in case the original document became unavailable." Margaret's wineglass froze halfway to her lips. The room seemed to hold its breath. I don't understand," she stammered. But her eyes told a different story. They darted toward her handbag, sitting on the side table, the same oversized bag I'd seen her slip the manila envelope into months ago. "Eleanor contacted me," Mr. Peterson continued. "As the original will cannot be located, I am authorized to unseal this copy and read it to the family. I verified her death certificate and confirmed we have the appropriate family members present." Mr. Peterson sat at the dining room table and carefully opened his portfolio. He removed an envelope sealed with wax, showing the intact seal to everyone present before breaking it. The sound was small but final, like a verdict being delivered. "Shall I proceed?" he asked, looking around the room. My father nodded. Please. Margaret sank into a chair, her face a mask. Last will and testament of Virginia Eleanor Winters, Mr. Peterson began, his voice steady and clear. I watched Margaret's hands grip the armrests of her chair as Mr. Peterson read through the standard legal preamble. Her knuckles whitened with each passing sentence. I, Virginia Eleanor Winters, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The room was utterly still. Not even a cough or the shuffle of feet broke the silence as Mr. Peterson continued. When he reached the distribution of assets, Margaret leaned forward slightly, her shoulders tense. My property at 247 Maple Street, including all structures and the surrounding land, I leave to my granddaughter, Eleanor Winters, who has been my faithful companion these past 5 years, and who has expressed a genuine love for the home where she spent so many summers. A soft gasp escaped someone's lips. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, but forced myself to remain composed. To my grandson Jason, I leave my collection of bird figurines, which he admired since childhood. Jason smiled faintly, his eyes shining. To my granddaughter Sarah, I leave my complete set of pearl jewelry, including the earrings, necklace, and bracelet that my husband gave to me on our anniversaries, to wear on her wedding day and to keep thereafter. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted to Margaret's ears, where Grandma's pearl earrings still hung. To my son David, I leave my grandfather clock, which he lovingly restored, along with my investment account at First National Bank to support his children's education. David's expression remained neutral, but he sat up straighter, a quiet dignity, returning to his posture. Mr. Peterson continued through the list. Each bequest was specific, thoughtful, reflecting intimate knowledge of each family member's desires and needs. Grandma had left her china collection to her goddaughter, her first edition books to me, a donation to the local library in her name, specific jewelry pieces for each of her daughters and daughters-in-law, and then finally, to my eldest daughter, Margaret, I leave my wedding ring and my husband's pocket watch, as she expressed particular attachment to these items. I also leave her the sum of $10,000. Nothing else. No furniture, no jewelry beyond the ring, no control over the house or its contents, none of the items she had already taken. Margaret's face had drained of all color. There must be some mistake, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Mr. Peterson looked up, his expression professionally neutral. The will is quite clear, Mrs. Winters. It is properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. There is also a personal letter addressed to the family that Mrs. Winters asked to be read in the event the original will was not readily available. Shall I proceed with that as well? My father nodded, though his eyes were fixed on Margaret. Mr. Peterson removed a sealed envelope from inside the will and opened it carefully. He cleared his throat. My dear family, if this letter is being read, it means that my original will has somehow become unavailable. I have lived long enough to know that grief affects people in strange ways, and that sometimes the desire for control or possessions can overshadow better judgment. If my will has been misplaced, I forgive whoever might be responsible. If it has been deliberately hidden, I hope that this backup provides the clarity and fairness I intended. I have tried to be thoughtful in my decisions, considering not just who might want certain things, but who truly appreciated them while I was alive. Remember that objects are just objects. It is the love we share that forms our true legacy. Love always, Virginia. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stared at the floor, her entire body rigid. No one looked directly at her, affording her the small mercy of privacy in her humiliation. Mr. Peterson gathered his papers. I'll leave copies of the will for each of you, as required by law. The executor named in the will is not Mrs. Margaret Foster, but rather Mr. James Winters. He nodded toward my father. My father looked surprised, but nodded solemnly. I'll be in touch with you this week to begin the formal probate process. Mr. Peterson told him, then turned to address the room. If there are no further questions, I'll take my leave. No one had questions, or perhaps no one dared to speak. After Mr. Peterson left, the family remained frozen in place. It was my cousin Sarah who broke the silence. Aunt Margaret, she said softly, her voice neither accusing nor angry. I believe those are my earrings you're wearing. Margaret's hand moved to her ear as if she'd forgotten they were there. Without a word, she removed them, placed them on the coffee table, and stood up. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, passing me without a glance. No one stopped. Her. No one spoke as the front door opened and closed. The gathering dispersed soon after, people murmuring quiet goodbyes, avoiding direct comments about what had just happened. My father stayed behind, sitting heavily in Grandma's favorite armchair. Did you know? He asked me after everyone else had gone. About the will, I mean. I shook my head. Not the details. But I knew it existed. I knew Grandma wouldn't have left things unresolved. He nodded slowly. You did the right thing, Eleanor. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. Even in that moment of vindication, I felt no triumph. Only relief that Grandma's wishes would be honored, and a heavy sadness for the fracture in our family that might never fully heal. That night, I stayed in what would now be my house. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the wallpaper, the door frames that had measured my height throughout childhood. Every corner held a memory of her. In the study, I found the key to her desk drawer, still hanging on a hook hidden behind her framed wedding photo, just where she'd always kept it. The bottom drawer was empty now, of course. Whatever papers had been there were long gone. But taped to the bottom of the drawer was a small envelope I hadn't noticed before. My name was written on it in Grandma's elegant script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded around a small brass key identical to the one I'd just used. Eleanor, the note read, you always noticed the details, just like me. This is the key to the drawer, but it's also something more. It's trust. It's seeing clearly. It's understanding that preparations matter. Keep it close. And remember that sometimes the quiet ones see the most. I love you always, Grandma. The next morning, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun rise over what was now my garden. Though dew glistened on the grass, catching the light like scattered diamonds. A text message pinged on my phone. From Margaret. I'm sorry. The things I took are in boxes in my garage. I'll bring them back this weekend. I didn't respond immediately. There would be time for reconciliation, perhaps. Time for understanding, but not yet. Instead, I slipped off my shoes and walked barefoot through the wet grass, feeling the earth beneath my feet, hearing Grandma's voice in the whisper of leaves overhead. Always keep a backup. It wasn't just about papers and legal documents. It was about fortifying yourself against betrayal, about maintaining your truth when others try to rewrite it, about standing firm when the world expects you to be swept aside. 3 days later, Margaret's car pulled into the driveway. She unloaded 4 large boxes by herself, refusing my offer of help with a tight shake of her head. As she set down the last box, she paused, looking at me directly for the first time since the will reading. She always said you were the most like her, Margaret said, her voice barely audible. I didn't want to see it. I said nothing, but held her gaze steadily. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, but I want you to know that I understand now. Why she chose you for this place. You'll take care of it the way she would have wanted. She turned to leave, then stopped and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a manila envelope, the one I'd seen her take from Grandma's desk that first day, and handed it to me. The original, she said simply. It says exactly the same things. I accepted it without looking inside. It didn't matter anymore. The truth had already been spoken, had already reordered our family's understanding of itself. Margaret drove away, and I carried the boxes into the house one by one. They contained all the items she had removed: the silver candlesticks, the porcelain figurines, the embroidered table linens. Each object returned to its proper place, like words restored to a story someone had tried to edit. As the weeks passed, our family began to heal. Sunday dinners resumed, though they were held at my house now. Margaret attended, quieter than before. Her authority diminished, but not her place in the family. Sarah wore Grandma's pearls and announced her engagement. David restored the grandfather clock to working order, its steady ticking a comforting rhythm in the entryway. And I lived in the house where I had spent so many Thursdays, surrounded by Grandma's books and furniture, tending her garden as the seasons changed. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, I would sit at her writing desk and open the drawer with the brass key I now wore around my neck. The drawer remained empty, but that emptiness told its own story, about what had been taken, what had been restored, and what had been transformed. About a quiet granddaughter who found her voice, about justice that came not with a shout, but with the breaking of a seal. About a woman who knew that sometimes the most important thing you can leave behind is not what you owned, but the truth of who you were and who you loved. In the end, it wasn't the house or the possessions that mattered most. It was the understanding that even in silence, even in absence, some bonds cannot be broken, and some stories cannot be rewritten. My grandmother had known this. She had prepared for it. And in doing so, she had given me not just a home, but a voice. The brass key around my neck became my talisman, reminding me daily of her final lesson, that the strongest power often lies not in what we say, but in what we have carefully, quietly set aside for when it will be needed most.